So it's exactly a year to the day since Donald Trump assumed office, and he's completely disrupted the world as we know it, whether it's in foreign policy or domestic policy. We'll talk about foreign policy because, of course, he's in Davos and he's just given a speech there, and this is completely disrupting, the transatlantic alliance between America and Europe. Of course, Trump has made his ambitions about taking over Greenland, whether by military means or by economic power. Let me go across to one of the most influential voices when it comes to military strategy, Douglas Macgregor, retired U.S. Army veteran. Thank you very much, sir, for speaking with us here on News 18. I want to start off with this whole obsession around Greenland, the most topical thing that's going around. Why does Trump want Greenland? He says he's going to do it the easy way or the hard way. He's not ruled out a military strategy to get Greenland. Right now he's talking about purchasing it, but he's also not ruling out a conquest, an outright conquest of Greenland. Why does he want it? Can you explain that?
Well, publicly, he insists that Greenland is under threat of domination by China or Russia. That's untrue. There's no evidence for that at all. The Russians and the Chinese have no interest in Greenland. Secondly, he says that we have to control it militarily for our own national security. Well, we've controlled that area from Alaska all the way to Greenland over to Norway since the end of the Second World War. We have a treaty with Denmark that was signed in 1951 that allows us to place bases on Greenland. No limit to what we can put there. We already have a base. We utilize it for satellite connectivity and communications, command and control. We've had great relations with the Danes. Now, then the other argument that he makes is, well, we have discovered rare earths and other valuable minerals. Well, those are all over the Arctic. They're all over Canada. Right now, the largest concentration of rare earths in Europe is just being discovered off the coast of Norway, in about 250 feet of water. Very easy to harvest if the Norwegians decide to do it. The Norwegians have postponed doing anything about it for environmental reasons, but the point is that there's nothing to stop us from going to Norway and making arrangements to jointly exploit it. What we really need that we do not have is a rare earth refinery. Refining is the bottleneck. There are plenty of rare earths and other valuable minerals available to us. You don't have to go to war for it under any circumstances. So then finally, what is this? I don't know. Is this just another event mortgaged to his vanity? I have no idea.
So if it's about adding more territory under the American flag, if he wants to add more American territory, much like presidents in the past in the 18th and 19th centuries did, Jefferson or Polk, and he wants to imprint his name in history, do you think the rest of the world will accept it? I mean, Europe has already gone into a tailspin around this whole Greenland issue. Are we now looking at an era of Imperial America, Imperial Trump? Trump is the new king?
No, not at all. In fact, I would argue that we're close to financial bankruptcy. And this comes across as almost a desperate measure to somehow or another convey the impression that we are not on the edge financially when we are. I don't think any of that makes any sense. I mean, you've got to understand that when we fought the revolution in the 1700s, one of our goals was eventually to establish an English-speaking country from the Atlantic to the Pacific. That's what we did. That was always the goal. This has nothing to do with that. And I don't think you're going to be able to pay very many Americans to move up to Greenland. That's a pretty terrible place to live. It makes Siberia look good. So at the end of the day, I think it's foolish. International law obviously prohibits this whatsoever. Let's assume he goes up there and he puts troops there and he puts up the American flag. It'll remain ours as long as we keep a large military presence there, but it doesn't change the facts. It doesn't make it legal. And I don't see any evidence that the King of Denmark is prepared to either sell it or give it to us. So I'm not, at the end of the day, one wonders what is going on in his mind, because there's nothing up there that we cannot already get. And there is no reason for us to fear a loss of security because we're already there militarily as it is.
So is it taking away attention and the headlines from the main war that's going on in continental Europe, which is the war in Ukraine? And ever since, I think, Trump met Putin back in August, Putin has only doubled down on the war. I mean, every day he's attacking Ukraine, and it doesn't seem like Putin's interested in a ceasefire anytime soon. He's going to end this on the battlefield with only one outcome, which is a decisive military victory for Russia.
Well, I think that's absolutely true, but nobody in Washington, and for that matter, nobody in Brussels, has been willing to listen to the Russians or to recognize their legitimate national security interests in Ukraine. We have no vital strategic interest in Ukraine. We never have. The notion that NATO should march 500 miles to the east to defend this Ukrainian rump state is absurd. It makes absolutely no sense. This was simply a naked attempt to utilize Ukrainian manpower. We've killed, as a result, I think 1.5 to 1.8 million Ukrainians in uniform have died. We keep saying that Russia has suffered. There's no evidence for that at all. Russia is thriving. It has not taken the heavy casualties that we've said they've been taking. It has made Russia stronger. We've just embarrassed ourselves and looked stupid. I mean, just take it from this standpoint. Why would you go to Africa if you're from India and start a proxy war in Angola against South Africa? Well, you wouldn't. It's a dumb idea. South Africa is going to win that war. It's next door. You don't start a war on somebody's doorstep. Same stupidity is at play in Washington about Taiwan. Taiwan's part of China. We recognized that a long time ago. If you try to defend Taiwan against China and China decides to seize it, you're going to lose it. I mean, these are just dumb ideas that just won't die. And most of us hoped that President Trump, if elected, would kill these bad ideas, but he hasn't done it.
So, since you mentioned Taiwan, do you reckon that's going to be the next war? I mean, I think he said this in the New York Times interview, if I'm not mistaken, that he's pretty much told Xi Jinping he can do what he wants with Taiwan. And he said, I hope he doesn't attack it, but even if he does, that's fine.
I think President Trump understands the reality that strategically, we cannot compete with China in the waters off the coast of China and Taiwan. It's impossible. I mean, we're a maritime power primarily and an aerospace power. We're not a land power. We can't and don't want to put millions of troops on the ground in Asia. Every time we've stuck our nose into Asia for any length of time and put troops on the ground, we regretted it. So, no, I don't think that's likely. But China keeps coming up because it's a useful justification for massive military spending, particularly in the Navy and the Air Force. Eventually, it's all going to stop. You undoubtedly are looking at what's happening in Japan, the Japanese bond market.
Yeah.
Our bond market is going to follow Japan's bond market at some point. We're going to have a 5% on the 10-year bond. When that happens, all bets are off. You can't just print money in perpetuity. That's why we had Bretton Woods. That's why it was pegged to gold and other currencies. Right now, you could just print as much as you like, and it's backed by the faith and strength and power of the United States, which a lot of people don't buy any longer.
So what happens when that happens, when the bond yields hit 5%? In the last year that Trump has been in office, the one time he blinked was right after announcing the reciprocal tariffs in April, I think it was, and then the Chinese started selling U.S. treasuries, and the bond yields soared, and he sort of pulled back and he blinked. So what happens the next time this happens?
I think ultimately we will come home. We will simply start pulling our forces away from the rest of the world. We will turn inward and focus on our own problems here at home, which is what, frankly, he was elected to do. Remember, always ask this question: when did the British leave India? They left in 1947 when the debt to GDP ratio as a result of the Second World War was 240%. Should they have left earlier? Absolutely. It made good sense to leave much earlier, but they didn't, and it cost them everything. We don't need to be in most of the places beyond our borders right now. The world has changed. This multipolar world is not a world where gunboats and military power decide all the outcomes. On the contrary, we're much more focused today, as we should be, on economics and prosperity. So I think that will happen, but I'm afraid we're going to go broke first before we do it.
And just one final word. So this whole coinage of Monroe Doctrine, what's happened in Venezuela, you refer to the gunboats. Is Trump not going to sort of imprint his control and his authority over the Americas?
No. First of all, we're already the dominant power in the Western Hemisphere. Good Lord, we've been that almost since 1812. This thing called the Monroe Doctrine that gets a lot of lip service didn't mean a great deal when it was announced because we didn't have the military power to really enforce it. And it really didn't come up in conversation after about 1850 until the 1920s, when people said World War I had been a mistake. We shouldn't have involved ourselves in it. We need to stay home. And people started bringing up the Monroe Doctrine. I think that's just meaningless at this stage. The truth is, finance matters, money matters. We're running out. We can't go on as we are. That's going to be the fundamental change that causes us to pull back from many of the places we're in. As far as Venezuela is concerned, what's happened in Venezuela? We've now said, oh, well, we'll work with the government is there. And the government is pretending to work with us, at least for the moment. And we've managed to steal $500 million worth of oil. What are we going to do when there's no more oil to steal because they can't pump it? Their oil infrastructure is falling apart. What do we do when the population there says no? When the armed forces refuse to cooperate? We've spent tens of millions of dollars to buy access so that we could kidnap Maduro. This was not a purely military operation. We bought off large numbers of people. You can't do that in perpetuity. I don't see any future for what I would call a muscular foreign policy anywhere for the United States right now. It's unnecessary. We have no existential threats beyond our borders. And I think more and more Americans are coming to that conclusion. So whatever President Trump is doing will ultimately vanish on the wind when he leaves.
Before we let you go, I mean, the one region of the world that we haven't spoken about, and a lot is happening there, is the Middle East. You've had the war in Gaza for over 2 years now. There is a temporary ceasefire. We don't know when a permanent peace will come to Gaza. Trump has just announced this board of peace. And all of this is linked to what's happening in Iran. Because ultimately, it's Iran that's the principal player there. All of these are proxies, whether it's Hamas or Houthis. And there we've had, the biggest revolution that we've seen, at least in the last decade or so. And it's been repressed in the most brutal fashion. What do you think is going to happen there? Will the regime there collapse, or are we far from there?
First of all, there's no war in Gaza. What's happening in Gaza is large numbers of people. We don't know exactly how many, but certainly several 100,000 have been slaughtered. That's not a war. When you bomb and strafe and shoot people that have no means of self-defense, it's not a war. It's just slaughter. Secondly, this so-called disruption in Iran is grossly exaggerated. There was no threat to the regime. What happened in Iran was initially large numbers of people are complaining about inflation, about the standard of living, and that's entirely understandable. And I think the regime is trying to handle that as best they can. They probably should turn to China and borrow $1 billion. I hope they'll do that. That would help enormously. But otherwise, what we saw was an attempt by the Mossad, the CIA, and MI6 in London to take advantage of it. And they actually urged people to shoot at the police in the hope that the regime would overreact. What the regime has been doing is been executing fifth columnists. Imagine what you would do in India if people in Pakistan had sent, 1,000 agents inside India and then stirred up the population there.
Yeah.
And after it was over, what would you do? You'd round up the fifth columnists and execute them. That's what they're doing. But Iran's not going away. And unfortunately, I think we're headed to war with them. I hope we can avoid it. And I know that President Trump, in his heart, doesn't want to become involved with it. But he's hostage to Netanyahu.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for this fascinating conversation. Colonel Douglas Macgregor, thank you for your time and your perspective.